Well, welcome to On the Offense, where, as our loyal listeners know, and Jeff, we have a lot of loyal listeners, let me tell you.
Oh, we've got buckets full of loyal listeners.
Yeah,
Loyal,
our
loyal,
our
loyal.
loyal, yes,
They're both loyal and loyal.
yeah, exactly. They all know that what we tend to do here is focus on a topic that is somehow newsworthy and relates in some way to marketing and communications. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So in our last podcast, we offered a nod to graduation season. So here we are in the middle of May. And so that was a couple of weeks ago. Graduations were just kicking in. And the question we asked a couple of weeks ago was, would you still choose the same major in college if you had a chance to do it all over again? Which in our case, because we had both majored in journalism as undergrads, prompted essentially a dissection of the state of journalism today and all of its woundedness, right? But having said that, I believe it's safe to say that we both say that, yeah, we would do it all over again. We would major in journalism all over again. And that podcast wasn't just answering that question in a yes or no way, but it also got into why would we do it again? What are all the good things that you can apply to other things that you do for a living if you major in journalism? Those types of things, right? So we kind of look at today as a kind of sort of part two of that discussion. Graduations are still going on all around us. Barbara, who I'll introduce in a moment, I believe, Barbara, today is USC's graduation. So, Jeff, what do we say? What do we say, Jeff?
Oh, I don't know, John.
Right on, baby. So
I say we are Penn State, just so you know.
that that is what you say. That's true. So, kind of part two is we're going to focus more on talent, namely, what are companies looking for in talent today? And that's true if you're, what are they looking for in young talent, people coming off of campus, that type of thing. But it really doesn't matter how old you are or experienced you are. What are companies looking for in talent in general? What can people coming out of school do to up their chances of finding a job? We're also interested in a couple of related topics. For example, what are companies doing to market themselves to potential employees, right? How do you, as a human resources function or a company, ensure that, the best and brightest are coming to you, right? And then once you get them in the door, what are you doing to keep them? What are you doing to engage them? Make sure they don't quit, which opens up a whole can of worms, time and money to replace them. So, what are companies doing in that regard? Recruitment, marketing, and employee engagement are two of the services that Jeff's and my firm offers. And that's why we thought it would be interesting to talk about this today relative to what we do. But we also think it's just a really important topic in general, but especially right now with graduation season going on. So all of that is what has led us to this part two for the month of May. And I am thrilled to say that we are breaking new ground in this podcast thanks to our first ever panel discussion. And I'm even more thrilled to be able to introduce the two people who have kindly agreed to make up this panel. Barbara Schmidt-Serby, with whom I had a ball in business school, and who is now VP of Talent. I hope I got that right. Correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, at KB Home in Los Angeles. And Darryl Hoffman, with whom I worked for many years here in Dallas with Unisys. We also had a ball in our own way, Darryl, yes, and who is still VP of HR for Unisys, still based here in Dallas. So, Barbara, why don't you start by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself, then we'll do the same with Darryl, and then we'll jump into our discussion. With that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. As John mentioned, I am currently the VP of Talent at KB Home. They are a single-family home builder who builds all over the United States. I've been there not very long, about a year and a half, and I oversee both recruiting, but also talent development and leadership development. But prior to joining KB Home, I spent about 18 years at Warner Brothers Studios. I toiled for about 10 years in compensation, working my way up to VP of compensation, and then a very smart head of HR hip checked me over into recruiting, which I fell in love with. And I led the Warner Brothers recruiting team for about 5 years, did another little stint in another role, and then came back to recruiting or talent acquisition when we were acquired by AT&T and we became Warner Media. And I had very busy years leading that global team that grew to about 300 people, where we were recruiting for not only Warner Brothers, but HBO, HBO Max, Turner, CNN, and a number of global positions during the pandemic. So it was a great experience, really trying to be competitive in a very competitive labor market, if you all recall. And I left there just a couple years ago, and they were acquired again by Discovery, and they became Warner Brothers Discovery. So I have a very long career in both HR and in recruiting, and I'm happy to be on this panel today to share some thoughts.
Happy to have you here, Barbara. You see, Jeff, this is what happens when you go to business school at the University of Southern California. You have careers like that. You see, you keep fighting.
John, your school outshines mine.
Yeah, I didn't say that.
Outshine mine.
I did not say that. Mr. Hoffman, over to you.
Oh, thanks, John, and thanks for the invite. So, contrary to Barbara, my history is a little, slightly differently in that I didn't stem from HR. When I joined the business world, it was straight out of college, straight out of university in South Africa. And my first job was with IBM. So always been in the technology sector. Spent a bit of time with IBM, and IBM essentially was my trip over to the UK, where I spent a year and a little bit with IBM before I moved to Hewlett Packard. So I've been with IBM and HP. And my roles in both of those were really very much business focused, right? And with HP, I took up roles that involved supporting teams across Europe, building delivery centers and building centers in India, as well as having a population all across the world that sort of made up my team in delivering services to clients. However, after serving the client for a number of years, I found there was a gap in HR in terms of fulfilling requisitions and finding talent and bringing talent into the organization that would then go on to service my customer. So in discussing with the then HR leader at HP, I decided to move away from the business and move into HR and set up a workforce planning and talent management function for Hewlett Packard worldwide. And on the enterprise side, which is where I was based, we looked at introducing ways in which we could look at talent, look at fulfilling the demand from the business of people, and essentially building up a workforce planning function that was interlocked with the business, with resource management in the business, and filling talent out in that way. HP then brought me across the US to where I am today, John, and where I met you in Dallas, and spent a little bit of time with HP, and was very fortunate in being responsible for running the HR leg, I guess, of the merger between CSC and Hewlett Packard Enterprise that then became DXC. So I learned in 18 months about HR and talent and about managing talent, more than I'd probably learned in the prior 10 years. So very proud to have been part of that initiative. Whereafter, a very close colleague of mine came across to Unisys, who then became the CHRO at Unisys and asked me to come across and help Unisys build the HR function as well. And that's where we are today. John, essentially, the only change in not going too far down this line is that we've adopted a slightly different approach to how we structured HR. And my HR arm now is essentially under technology. So I'm now responsible for the HR technology stack, which involves essentially, some of the core products like Workday, but also then looking at what we're going to be doing for the next 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years in the space of AI. So as I mentioned previously, AI is probably going to come up in this discussion because that is the hot topic out of the market at the moment. But happy to contribute to the podcast. So thanks for the invite, John.
The pleasure is ours. Thank you both for joining us. Clearly from Jeff, from their background, this is going to be a really good discussion. So thank you. So let's jump in. I mean, maybe start with Barbara, maybe start with you. I mean, just maybe a very broad question to start. What do companies look for in talent in general? I mean, maybe that's too broad. I don't know. But...
It is very broad. I say, but when I think about recruiting, the basic thing is, does this person meet the requirements of the job, and can we afford them? Right? Those are those first screening qualification questions that recruiters or whoever's doing the intake will consider. Right? And then also, like, do they want to work here? Right? Sometimes we're not looking at applications. We're reaching out to folks, headhunting, and like, are they even interested in working here? Do they know this company? Do they know our product or service? I think in some companies, it's wonderful when a hiring manager has given some thought to, I have a vacancy. How can I use this vacancy? You know, do I just replace the person who left, or is there a way to enhance the skills of my team? Where are the gaps on my team? Is it a skill? Is it a philosophy? Maybe they come from a different country or a different point of view that might help us build a better product or market our product better to our consumers. So anytime you have a hiring manager who's thought about the search strategy, that's a little inside baseball terminology in recruiting, but has given some thought to like, how can I best use this vacancy to enhance the skills or the value of my team to the organization? That's a huge bonus, right? Because then you can really sort of drill down on what you're looking for. But I think every company probably approaches things differently. There's some small companies that are just like, I need a body in this job who can do it. Yeah. And there's other companies who are thinking, I need someone who can do the job today, but what can they do in 3 years or in 5 years? What do they bring to us that we don't already have, right? And I just think there's a whole, I'm curious what you think, Darryl, but I think there's a whole range of how people approach looking for talent.
Yeah, I think, Barbara, you're quite right. I think how people and how companies look for talent vary based on the requirements, right? It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it is. And you know, when you go about looking for talent, especially in today's world where there are a lot of applications coming for each position, right? If I'm sure you know in your world, Barbara, there's, you know, for every job you get a lot of applications. And you're trying to wade through those applications to even get as a graduate down selected into even talking to a recruiter is really difficult today. You know, sure, the very, very specialized skills, the very highly sought after skills, not everybody applies for. But in general, coming out of a business school or coming out of a university, some business graduate program, you have got a lot of competition out there. And it is up to the companies as to how they define what they want to look for.
So let me jump on your comment, Darryl, about coming out of university. What about young people? What specific things are companies looking for in young people? They could be coming out of undergrad, they could be coming out of business school, whatever. Are there certain characteristics, things like that companies are looking for?
Look, the basics are still there, John. You know, companies still want skill. They still want the experience. They still want the right degree. You know, they still want somebody's ability to do the job, right? There's technical skills and soft skills. Well, we all know about that. For years and years and years, there's been different subsets of skills that companies will look at in the interview process. Don't underestimate soft skills. They are still very important. We still want candidates to be able to hold their own in a conversation. We still want candidates to be able to express an opinion about something in a conversation. Candidates have to show leadership, have to show initiative. Candidates should never be afraid of bragging in a way about things that they've done in their college experience. You know, what clubs did they manage? What initiatives did they run? Did they do any community work? Did they help out, colleagues? Were they mentors? You know, the smallest thing gives a recruiter insight into what a true soft skill quality is. So, I think how to interview is a whole nother podcast, John, because I think, how people come across in interviews in the old cliche that you make the biggest impression in an interview in the first 30 seconds is very important. But how people carry themselves from a soft skills perspective, and also going into the job that they're going to be doing. I mean, do I want somebody who's going to be program driving, coding and sitting in an office coding and doing a technical job? Do they have to be flamboyant and excitable and client facing? No, they don't. So there is still some measure of judgment that the recruiter will apply based on whatever the manager needs. But at the base level, you've got to be a human being. You've got to demonstrate vulnerability. You've got to demonstrate what you are good at. You've got to demonstrate some sort of cultural fit and attitude. That's very important. The way people are coming through university and college nowadays, and what you're being exposed to, and even there's a seismic shift, John, in not necessarily needing a college degree. there's a lot of discussion happening.
Point.
There's a lot of discussion happening with experience. There's a lot of discussion happening with, the college route is not the be all and end all. I'm not saying don't go and do an MBA, because I think there is experience that puts you in a different discussion category when you have been through an MBA program, when you have been through a college program. But there's some very good recruits out there, candidates out there that haven't done a college degree, that have only got a high school qualification. But you've got to give everybody a fair chance. And I think across the board, it's very difficult to step up and get noticed. So everything you can do from a skills perspective on the soft side, the technical skills are easy, John. If you go into a technical interview, you either know how to code in Python or you don't. It's that simple.
Right.
Some of those skills will have different tests at the interview process, but definitely fit and culture is becoming increasingly important. And then also just what that recruiter and what the manager believes you can contribute to the team, to collaboration, and are you a go-getter? Are you going to bring a different element to the team? Are you going to be enthusiastic? Are you going to really the return on investment? Everybody that's done business knows what is the return on investment that you as a candidate are going to give that manager in the company.
Yeah,
Let me jump in with the question if
I could look. This is so fascinating to me. Go ahead.
Well, in my career, I've seen recruitment really evolve, I think, with technology, everything else out there that screens clients. When you're putting together a resume now, you have to ask yourself, what do I do to beat that algorithm that's going to be the first thing that looks at my resume and is going to weed out probably 9 out of 10 or 98 out of 100. And so my question to you both would be, how big of a role do those algorithms play before they even get into your hands, these resumes? Because I know I have a feeling that it's hard. Could you give a little bit of insight to our listeners and viewers?
Most big companies use applicant tracking systems, right? And we've been using them for 20 plus years. There are ways to do keyword searches and look for someone with marketing or market research or a specific programming skills. I've never worked anywhere where we use an algorithm to weed out candidates. That said, with AI, I think might be more prevalent in the near future. I think honestly, more than the algorithm, I think sometimes a recruiter, opens a rec, there's 1,000 applicants, and they start screening them. They get to, 20 good candidates. They just stop because I got a slate and I got 10 other jobs. Mm-hmm. I got to move on. So in my mind, and I may not be right, but in my experience, a lot of times it's the volume versus the algorithm that you're trying to beat. And I think having been in the job market in the last few years, I think still more than anything, more than crafting a resume to beat the algorithm, you've got to network and you've got to know somebody who knows somebody, right? So to get your resume to the top of the pile. It sounds awful. It's like, well, who do you know? But people who network and have a big network and hear about jobs before they're posted tend to get more opportunities to be considered. So I didn't quite answer your question because I can't speak to the algorithm, but I think it's a multi-pronged approach to trying to get someone to speak to you about an opportunity. I don't know, Darryl, I'm curious what you think.
So you're backing into, I think, let's call it a year, 2 years, or 3 years before you even start the job search. Because I think everything that a student, a university grad, a non-university grad, to your point, Barbara, about networking, you're building your persona. And John, I know as part of what your company does, you build brands, you build personas. That is so important for the individual. Because even though you're only graduating in 2 or 3 years, you've got to start working on that first job already. It's no good just turning up at your class and doing the class and rushing home and going out. You've got to spend time every week, every day, doing something that will contribute to your value to a recruiter. And by adding more and more to your resume, by adding more and more of this experience to your resume, Barbara, what you said, even if it's a human eye or an AI eye, it will differentiate you from the pack. And the pack is big. Let's be clear, it's very big. And at different levels, coming in at the entry level, there's a huge population that's vying for the same job. But what differentiates you beyond just knowing people, intern programs. If your college or university is running an intern program, jump on it, make yourself available, research more, 2 years, 3 years, 1 year before what you want to go and try and do. You can't sit back and just rely on a resume that's 2 pages long, having skills that everybody else is having at the same time, right? So differentiation is key, Bob, and I think that's where you were going. You've got a network, you've got a social. I've spoken to a number of students who have created their own web pages for their personas, that have created their own LinkedIn profiles already as students. That is so key. Go to events. If there's a network speaking event, if there's something happening, locally down the road, you've got to make yourself visible and put that on your resume. I always say to people I mentor, and I've mentored a number of people in my career, you have to develop an opinion about everything. Read up on stuff. When you go to an interview, when you get to an interview, when you put things onto your resume, make sure you've got an opinion about it, because that's what the whole the whole breadth of your experience is going to come to the fore with, right? You have to be able to speak about things. And how do you get to speak about things? You experience things. So it's great. I sit here, I went to a conference last week. I went to a conference before that. It's important, even as a student, you get out there and you network, or greatest point, socialize, learn about what's going on in the market. Students who don't do that extra peripheral effort do stand a greater challenge of trying to be identified by an algorithm or not. Because remember, algorithm or not, that still picks up on that. It still picks up that your resume is slightly longer. You've got a couple of extra keywords out there. I volunteered. Great, that person's a volunteer at a nonprofit. That makes them different, because they might have different skills then, right? They've managed a program. They've done so. Without belaboring the point, Barbara, you're 100% right. Got a network, and you've got to differentiate yourself to get through the algorithms, to get through the eyes-on recruiter that says, wow, I really like this. This person's made extra effort, hasn't just gone to class, hasn't just gone back and then done something that doesn't contribute to the future success.
This is so great. I don't know whether you guys know this or not, but I am an adjunct professor at UNT, Barbara, University of North Texas here in Dallas. And students ask me all the time, what can I, what's most important in getting a job? I tell them, now these are communications, advertising, branding students. So my answer is flavored in that way. But what I tell them is 2 things. One is internship, and you mentioned that, right? Second thing is become a content creator. Now, how do you do that? You write for the school paper, or you could start your own blog, right? Gelman's sister did that. She was a communications major at Elon, and she started her own blog. And believe me, she used that in her interviews, and it was part of her resume and all that kind of stuff, right? And because if you are a communications person, they can see that you've, to your point, Darryl, gone beyond, created something. They can also see your writing style, your commitment to quality, how consistently you're producing new content, as opposed to just slapping one thing up there and leaving it, right? That kind of stuff. Just fascinating. Oh, by the way, I haven't heard any mention of GPA. Does that matter?
My opinion, Barbara, I don't think it does, John. I personally don't think it does, and it doesn't even come up on a resume. It doesn't come up on I can't remember that a recruiter's ever asked for that. So no. I've
had some executives ask for specific jobs, but it is not a predominant thing. I mean, people, they want to know that you graduated college and, maybe with honors. All of those things go into the total picture of who you are, but it's not the first thing ever that I've ever had somebody ask me. Only present to me 4.2 GPA candidates, which was good for me.
Yeah.
The only thing, John, I will say is that there is certainly in some of the more specialized career groups that is still applicable, right? I do know in some of the medical programs, for example, those are still applicable. So again, I know this is marketing communications, but I agree with you. In this space, in the business space, to Barbara's point, it's about the whole picture. But just to be level set, there are other careers out there that still require that.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears. Let's look at it from the other side. What if you're looking for a job, And again, whether you're coming right out of school or not, doesn't matter. What are people looking for in the companies themselves these days? Is it commitment to the local community? You assume this is a company or an industry that somebody is naturally interested in. But like, what other things help bring to you?
Yeah. It's very different than it was, right? I think, decades ago, I don't know which generation it was, but people would take a job and work there for life, right? You went to work for, I don't know, Kodak or even IBM. And, you're like, oh, I'm going to stay here for whatever, 40 years and retire. And that's going to be my career. And, somewhere around, I think, the 1990s, that sort of changed. And the concept of sort of changing jobs mid-career became more prevalent. And that was sort of because companies weren't making the commitment to people for 40 years, right? So you had to be able to adapt and change jobs. But, now I think, and I don't want to totally generalize about generations, but there, folks coming out of college now or have come out in the last few years have a very different approach to selecting the companies that they want to work for. It's not just pay and benefits. It's not just a good job where I can learn something and then maybe get promoted in a couple of years. It is, to your point, John, are they active in the community? Do they care about the environment? Can I have work-life balance? Can I work from home? Right? Can I go to my kids' sporting events? Right? It's not just paying my rent or my mortgage and putting food on the table. I think there's a number of folks in the workplace now that have other priorities than those we were, maybe more accustomed to. So I can't answer your question directly because I think every job seeker has a different list of priorities that they're sort of comparing to versus the offerings. The one thing I will say is 5 years ago, they could be very selective, right? Because everybody couldn't find enough people to hire and you could be selective and really sort of cut your own deal. Now, in a lot of functions, the job market is tightened and you can't be as picky, right? You're sort of like, I'm going to take this job. It meets 70% of what I'm looking for. I'm going to call that a win. The thing that a good recruiter does is figures out what the candidate wants out of the job and then persuades them that the job we have to offer meets most of their criteria. There's a bit of a close, right? Like a sale. Like you want them to take your job and not the job across the street. So what are the things they want? And if you can say, oh, here's the laundry list you gave me and here are all the things we can offer you. That's what a good recruiter does to close a candidate and get them to select the job we're offering versus the job across the street.
So both sides are trying to close the deal.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, 100% agree. I think from a, John, Jeff, what you guys do from a marketing perspective is hugely important for a company outwards, right? A marketing department and the communications department in a company has to get out on media and on sort of social networking and showing the fun pieces of the company. We had this day and we had this and our team went out to volunteer here and we offered, as well as from a recruitment perspective, where Barbara was going is, what are you offering? In the same way we want a return on investment from you, what are we as a company providing you in that space? So it is all the elements of work from home and benefits but how flexible are you on your benefits? Because people earlier in their careers or earlier in their lives don't need as many benefits as somebody who is slightly further along in the career. So again, marketing that to get people to apply is very important. What am I walking into? Because you never know. It might be a great company and you end up with a terrible manager or leader. It's just you can't dictate any of that. So the best you can do on the brand awareness side and the company awareness side is put everything that they're going to see when they get into the company and get them to apply. So a little bit of a twist on what you were saying, Barbara, but fundamentally the same. Everybody's going to make their own decision based on what's important to them.
I've heard that, sometimes you're judged by how long you stay at jobs. First question is, first of all, what is that magic number? Is it 2 years? I've heard that thrown around quite a bit. And then the other part of it is how important is it when you've got a gap in your job history, maybe of a year, maybe of 2 years. What can you say to get around that? I know that recruiters like to zero in, why? Why is that gap there? Can you guys take that and just give us a little insight on what you guys look at and whether you think there's a demarcation line or whatever with regard to job history?
Shall I go first, Barbara, on this one? So, and you may, I'd be intrigued in return to see what your opinion is on this. But in essence, Jeff, it really depends on, I would say, how you interview, right? And why I say that is because somebody who would interview, let's say I was interviewing you, Jeff, and you said, wow, you took 2 years off. I'm not going to push you to share why that is. But as somebody who's had 2 years off, I would like to describe what I've been doing in those 2 years. Yeah. Because I don't think there's a wrong answer. If you decided you wanted to take a break from your career, or you wanted to go and do something different for a while, or try something, I don't think that's a problem. And I think most recruiters and most companies, I don't think it still has a stigma attached that it used to before. I don't think staying in a company for 2 years or 3 years, or leaving after 18 months has the stigma that it has before. Again, just because something left in 18 months, you don't know that individual circumstances. And if the candidate would like to share that, that's great. But I would prefer, and we always, recruiters that I've helped in the past, is you've got to look at the whole picture in terms of what does that person bring to the table. It does make it more difficult in other countries, I think, because certainly rotating people who are not as qualified or come through the door, don't end up being what they promised to be. Different story. But let's focus on the US and C, right? US and Canada. That's where we are right now. So my opinion, Jeff, is simply, I think it helps the process if you are able to explain. But look, we're in modern times. There's nothing wrong from a health and well-being perspective if you're taking some time off, right? Corporate world is stressful. Corporate world has its ups and downs, and whereas 15 years ago, if you took some time off, or you took a sabbatical, or you did something different, it was like, well, you can't handle it. This is a tough environment. If you need time off, you're not suited to this. I think that entire mentality has changed. I think there's a lot more flexibility and understanding now. I think everybody's lived that life. When people sit down, when they interview, and they go, well, if I can feel that, I've had a rough spell here, and maybe I should have taken some time off. So I don't think there's a magic number. If you leave in 6 months, well, I hope you've got a good reason for that. Then I would like to share that. What happened? Did you relocate, or was it just not what you expected? There's nothing wrong with being honest in an interview, but I don't know that it has as great an impact anymore compared to what it did a number of years ago.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this job hopper label is less of an issue now. And I think we have to remember that in the last, up until a few years ago, people were moving jobs every 18 months to 2.5 years because they would get a phone call. They weren't even looking. Hey, come to work at Netflix, come to Amazon, come to Apple, and here's another $20,000. Like, great, And so that it was very common. I think hiring managers still, I think a lot of times look at a resume and have that reaction too. Like, wow, they've never worked anywhere longer than 18 months. Built into your thought process, I may only have this person for 18 months, but is that okay? Right? Because I think hiring now with the expectation that people are going to stay 5 or 10 years might be where we're off the mark, because that may not be realistic anymore. It's slowing down a little, again, because of sort of the job market, I think. And I think those folks that change jobs every 18 months now own houses, and they might have kids in school, and they might have other things that they want a little more stability than they did earlier in their career. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think to Darryl's point, it's like, try and understand their career, why they moved, what they were looking for. Can you provide that in a way that they might stick around longer than 18 months? And also factor it into your strategy. Is that something that would work for my team? Do I just have this project that I need to deliver in 18 months, and if they move on after that, I'll be okay, right? I just need that brain for 18 months, right? So I think you just have to look at it through a different lens, and ask the right questions, and whoever's making the hiring decision has to be comfortable with the answers.
Sure. And Barbara, I'll add one thing to that, Jeff, just to underline what Barbara is saying, and we're in agreement there. If you look at the data, data drives everything, right? And the data now on lifespan of a new incoming employee is down right at the 2-year mark, right? So the 0 to 2 years attrition is still growing. It's growing, year after year. Now, companies that I almost want to say it's sort of a seesaw in a way, and that companies that have good environments, good packages, people that want to leave, right? Doesn't mean that your average attrition is not going to go up. But generally what you'll see in the data is that the companies that have the lowest attrition rates are generally ones that have a really good cultural environment that people enjoy working in, and it ticks a lot of those boxes. But to Barbara's point, I think thinking that we're going to have an employee for 10 years, that is very old school. You will have, but I think the average tenure of employees are going to come down. I think the new generation of worker that is coming out has a totally different requirement as to what they want to do. And nowadays, in a way, the job hopper, it costs company money. The cost of hiring is always the issue, and is always the measure by which all recruitment is measured. But certainly, I think there is a new world, and I do still think you're going to have people that will stay for 10 years, and you're going to have people who will stay for 2 years. It's just the way the market is right now.
I think that's all really good insights for us. So thank you for that.
Darryl, you just mentioned culture as a way to keep people, avoid attrition, if you will. I think that was the point of that one piece. What about that? What about employee engagement? I mean, we all hear about it now, and most companies that I'm aware of, at least, measure employee engagement. At least most larger / more sophisticated companies do that, at least annually. I think that at least annually, I would think. But what do you think? What do you think about employee engagement?
Yeah, this ties directly into internal comms and internal communication, John, which you and I worked on often at Unisys. And I think the number one element of employee sort of retention is trust, and trust comes through transparency. And a lot of the companies that I've helped and worked with, and CHROs that I've spoken to over the last 5 years, the number one challenge that any HR culture fit has is making sure employees know what's going on, right? The minute there's a merger announced, there's panic. The minute the word organizational change comes in, there's panic. But there may be very good reasons for things happening in the business. And, employees need to know what's going on. And I think from a trust and employee engagement perspective, there's always the balance, John. You and I discussed it many a time. That was, how much is too much communication? All of a sudden somebody gets 15 emails and they ignore that. But I think the culture side of that and developing trust through communication that is of benefit to you can navigate the mechanics. I get it. But retention is going to be solely based on trust that you have in the organization and what the leadership of the organization is doing for you. So I do believe that's one of the strongest elements. Communication is at the core, and also being able to provide the strategy and the vision for the company. Not all companies are doing well. Some companies are doing better than others. And communicate. People are adults. They want to know, same as you've got your bank balance and you've got your budget for your household and you've got things, it's the same for a business. So when there are, redundancies happening, risks happening, or it's an unsettling time, but getting the buy-in from the employee base is incredibly important.
We live in a post-COVID-19 environment, and I know that's had an impact on the psyches of workers, and I'm sure it's had an impact on the people who are trying to get jobs. How has that work from home aspect, which a lot of people really liked, impacted your ability to recruit people in? Do you need to give them a 3-day work week? Do you need to give them, 4 days at home, 1 day in the office? What have you seen?
I think people did like it. I think people who already worked at the company liked it. I think for new employees and new graduates who are starting their career, it's a harder onboarding and acclimation process, right? And so, I think just like everything else, you're going to have different people who want different things out of a job. But to answer your question, for the people who had it and liked it, they don't want to give it up, right? But there's so many companies that are saying, back to the office, 4 days a week. You did it before. There's no reason you can't do it again. You know, one of the most compelling things that happened to me during COVID was one of my employees who has 2 small children said to me, I never thought about working from home. But now that I've been home and I can pick my kids up after school and we can have dinner as a family and then I can work later in the evening, I didn't know what I was missing.
Yeah.
Now I know what I'm missing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what companies are missing when they think, let's just go back to the way we did it before because it worked fine. The difference is a good number of employees experience something that they think is better.
Yeah.
Right. And we're not, and I think a lot of companies are not willing to figure out a new way to do things well.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of job seekers who will avoid certain jobs if they're required to commute and be in the office 5 days a week. I think it's predominant. I don't know if it's predominantly women. I think it's a lot of women. I think it's younger workers who kind of got used to that. Again, everybody has their own list of priorities, but I think the companies that are more flexible will be able to expand their labor pool and look for people, more talented people. I mean, the narrower you make your labor pool, meaning if I'm only recruiting in Dallas and they got to be within driving distance 5 days a week, that's a much smaller number of people for that job than if I'm like, you know what, you can live anywhere or you can live anywhere in Texas and come in twice a month. So I think it's a strategic business imperative, right? To think about your recruiting strategy versus your work-life culture. I don't know how many companies think about it the way, I just explained. So that's just my point of view, but I do think it impacts our ability to recruit the best and the brightest when we're putting different restrictions on the labor pool.
That is so fascinating. I mean, then you look at people like Gelman, our producer here, who doesn't know anything different than work from home because that was the work culture that she entered into. So she doesn't even know anything different. If you're 27, 28 or younger, that's literally all you know. So now you are taking something away from us that was the standard, right? It's not like they have a comparative point like you're describing. All they know is work from home. So that's a big penalty, right, for people. So I don't know. Then you see all these companies getting these big battles with their employees over this stuff, and I understand it the other way too, but I go to where you are, Barbara, on that. Darryl.
The only piece I'd counter with is that I think the companies that get back into the office right are ones that can afford to put good campuses together, where they have a large collaboration of people. Because I would like nothing more than to walk into the office where I've got 3,000 or 4,000 people there, because it's almost like a community, and there are things that happen in community. I think all of us on this call started going, when we started our careers, going to the office. And I think I'm all for working from home. I really am. I think I support the model. It's, there's a lot of statistics that come out on productivity, et cetera, et cetera. But I think companies that make the office a much more welcoming place will succeed more at those that don't. And, we're sort of in a catch-22 because a lot of companies close down offices. A lot of companies close down various sites as a result of COVID, and now are trying to push people back into the office and a site that's only got a vending machine. So culturally, that's just not going to work. So I think the converse of that applies. I agree with you. I think the new world is dictating different modes of work, but I think companies still can be successful at having a back into the office culture if they're fulfilling the needs and the wants and the basic human hierarchy of being looked after.
And one other thing too is, I keep saying, if you want everyone back in the office, then be intentional about what we're going to do when we're there. Because if everybody's going to come to the office and go in their office and shut the door or put on their headphones and work independently, there's no collaboration happening, or the collaboration's happening through the screen anyway. But if you're going to bring me in the office, I don't know, twice a month, and we're going to have a team meeting and we're going to have lunch and we're going to do some longer term planning, or we're going to do some team building or something where we're truly interacting with each other, then that's time well spent, right? But if I'm just going to sit at a desk the way I do at home, and I'm only going to talk to people outside of the company like I do as a recruiter, um, I don't. It's hard to show employees the benefit of that. Besides the hour and a half commute each way.
Agree.
I love Darryl's point about make the workplace a compelling place to go to. I know way back in ancient history when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I was in New Jersey, and every one of our companies did a 4-day work week in the summer and then gave people Friday afternoons off. And I know when we came out of the building, there'd be a hot dog truck and an ice cream truck. And our facilities, we had a dry cleaner, we had a store that sold our products at these really ridiculously discounted prices. We had a doctor's office where they actually did x-rays. I mean, it was a really interesting place, and we had a gym. So I think that if you can build in all those components, people are going to be happier.
I've never worked for a so-called summer hours company that had Friday afternoon off. I think that's an East Coast thing. I've always thought that. I don't know why that's true, but I've not seen that. I have worked at companies that kind of randomly, periodically have, today's ice cream day, and then they have the truck there and things like that, which is always nice when I think they think of that. And again, we could go on for hours, right? And it's very broad, but what effect? But I think we have to talk about it at some level, right? What effect is AI having on talent management, on recruitment, et cetera?
So you'll see in a number of articles I've personally put onto LinkedIn as well. The same sort of sentiment applies across the board right now, which is AI will not replace in totality the human side of HR. It just won't. You still have to have, at the point of interview, at the point of some stage, a human interface. It's without saying you need that. The AI piece in the down select is probably from a graduate perspective, from a candidate perspective, that remains the topic of contention. The way in which AI is going to down select, when you get 1,000 resumes in, what are the rules that are going into that? And regulation around that, John, is very far behind at the moment, right? You cannot overregulate, you cannot regulate at the moment. Those sorts of rules have just not been put in place. So right now, Barbara, to your point, there is an algorithm. John, you mentioned beating the algorithm. There is an AI algorithm. But without that, without a shadow of a doubt, you're still going to need a human piece to do the recruiting, to do the actual interviewing, to do the bonding, the level of touch, the level of trust that you're going to build. You're not going to build trust out of a screen or a virtual AI bot, talking to a candidate. So on the recruiting front, I certainly think it will be more efficient. I think the down select will happen quicker. One of the things that candidates always complain about is I just never hear back from a recruiter. I applied, and some people apply to 100 jobs and they hear back from 2 recruiters. So again, in the age of technology, I'm always amazed that can't happen. And some companies are better than others at that. So I think AI will help the process. I think AI will help the tactical operational side of recruiting. But it's not going to replace the human side of getting that person through the door. Can't tell you what it's going to be 10 years from now, but right now where we are with AI, it's moving rapidly. It's moving extremely quickly in terms of how it's evolving, how it's getting better. And what I think, if I was looking into the future, where I think AI will really come to the fore is in the recruiting space, it's going to be able to combine a lot of data together. So it's not only going to look at a resume, it's going to cross-reference what certification you have, what degree you have, what programs you've published. So I think a lot of the knowledge, we're publicly available because a lot of the data sources will come from companies. But I think painting a better picture of a candidate is where AI is going to help. And it is going to speed that process along. So not a good answer. I think it does have an impact right now, but I think it's going to purely be on the operational side to start the day.
Hey, Darryl, I have a question for you. So when that AI algorithm is pulling data from my educational institutions and my volunteer work, is it also going to be taking a look at all my social media posts from the last, I don't know how many decades, and painting a true picture of me as a human being?
Good. Yeah. I mean, Barbara, it will. Unfortunately, it will. Again, we've already had, yeah, no, we've already had very public discussions, in the last couple of years about how social media has come back to influence decisions and influence perspectives of individuals. So I do believe it will, Barbara. If something's out there as public knowledge, it is going to be referenced in some way by AI.
I also think it'll be facial recognition software. Like I just happened to be walking by a protest and the next thing you know, I can get the job. Like it's going to be tricky, right?
Sure.
Because data will become easier to come by, but how you use that data, especially in making decisions about people's livelihood, it's really tricky, right? I'm glad it's not my job to figure this out, but it is tricky.
Yeah, privacy becomes a huge issue.
Yeah.
Jeff, you hit the nail on the head. I think the thing is AI is moving so quickly at the moment globally that I think any sort of regulation that may come out will already be overridden the next day. I think privacy will be a concern. I think there's going to be, this is very murky water right now. And, unfortunately, companies that are getting ahead in the AI space are ones that are leaving that whole regulation and ethics and privacy side to the side because they've got to move ahead in what they're doing. So very murky waters as to how this is all going to come to the fore in terms of privacy.
Well, I hope AI is helpful for the two of you and people in your profession. It sounds like generally it will be. Think about this, Jeff. All the hurdles that people like Barbara and Darryl and their colleagues have to clear just to get their job done, right? That seem harder, makes it seem like your jobs are harder now than they ever used to be, right? You got more volume of candidates than ever. You have people with more life circumstances than ever. Mm-hmm. You have less loyalty than ever to the company. True. And you have the whole work from home thing. I mean, this is a bundle of stuff that you have to deal with day in and day out. How do you guys keep your heads on straight? It's not easy.
You assume that we do.
I'm assuming that you do. Yes.
I mean, I think if everything was the same as it was 20 years ago, we would have changed jobs, right? Because it would have ceased to be interesting. So, I like solving problems. So if they come up one at a time and I can tackle them and figure out an approach, that's good. If they all show up at the same time, maybe not. But I mean, I think there's always a solution. There's always a different approach. And I think it only makes our product or, the candidates we find better. The results are going to be better if we continue to make the process work for more people. Right. So, it's not always a technology solution. Maybe it's a different approach to how we, fill jobs or assess candidates. But I feel like everybody's job, especially in the last 5 years, has gotten so much more complex. Right. And I think the uncertainty right now, I think there's a lot of chaos in the markets and people, it's hard to know which way businesses should strategize. And I think that trickles down to recruiting and managing people and culture. And so I think everyone in the workforce is experiencing some constant change, right? And I don't think it's any different, at least for what I do, than somebody in marketing or somebody building a product or pricing a product. And I tend to be very Pollyanna about these things. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask.
I think you're right. Everybody's jobs are more complex now than they used to be.
Yeah, I think sort of the converse to that, John. I don't know that it's making it more complex. I think we're actually being afforded the opportunity to get better at our jobs. I think with the source of data, with the availability of AI, with the sort of the presence of an ever-changing revolution now in terms of where this next step is, in technology. I think that this is actually very. Don't be misled by the comment I made in my previous statement. Is that I'm actually very positive about AI. I think despite the pitfalls, I think we're at a real inflection point in history now, where it comes to technologies ramping up both on the hardware side and the software side, John. I've always said that, we've got quantum on the one hand that is providing the processing power to AI on the other hand. So this is a really critical point in time for the entire world that we have. This is going to be, I do believe it's going to be positive, but like everything, there will be, there's ups and downs in everything that we do. There's pros and cons in everything that we do. But in sort of direct contrast to what you're saying, I think there is a lot of opportunity that's going to come out of this. Our jobs are complex, but conversely, we can use some of that complexity to make it easier.
I've heard it said that people don't fear change, they fear the unknown. And I think there's a lot of that when it comes to AI. But in order to do research and for everything I'm writing now, my God, what a great resource. I can go to ChatGPT and ask, okay, tell me about this company. Who are their competitors? How's the press coverage been? What do people think of them? And for things like that, it's been fantastic. So just my personal.
Yeah. And it is mind blowing. You guys are in the marketing space and communication space. Anybody watching this podcast can put anything into any of the large language models, into ChatGPT or Copilot, and the quality of the wording that comes out of there is mind blowing. So really the speed and the turnaround and the ability to get things done in a far quicker way is really already in such a short time mind-blowing. So what it's going to look like in a year's time, and we talk about college and we talk about graduates, there's a lot of challenges right now already in the college system with open AI and AI completing assignments and writing papers and writing, there's software out there to try and catch that, but certainly the world is evolving really quickly. And back to the recruiting piece, the next challenge for Barbara and I is going to be, well, hold on, what this person said, was that written by AI, or
Right.
where is the evidence, the credibility, how do we validate that person actually is or has or will do that? So it's strange. Now we've got a slightly different take on that, Barbara. Our jobs might have got even more complex now because AI is going to be the one thing that we're going to have to figure out how to handle in the process.
Already. I mean, I will say AI writes really good job posting. So if I'm doing that and all of the people applying their resumes and cover letters are written by AI, okay, turnaround is fair play. But at some point, they have to be able to speak cogently about what they can do, what they've accomplished, what they can provide for us. And I think the interview is going to have to become so much more important than the documents that support the recruiting process. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make good, intelligent decisions about in the selection process.
Yeah. The two words that I'll use to describe that in a nutshell is something which a gentleman by the name of Jason Averbook, who works for Mercer, put on a slide last week at one of the conferences I was at, and it was connected and connection. AI is connected, but humans are going to make the connection. So that's where the distinguishing, that you're still going to have, to your point, Barbara, you're still going to have that connection piece, which is actually, all right, great that they put this through AI and this is the resume, but they cannot speak to what's on there. That's the connection piece.
Yeah,
I love it. You know what I'd like to know, Jeff, what do you think? How do we even know that we're talking to Barbara and Darryl? Do we really know that?
I don't know. They could be deep fake. They could be bots for all we know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey guys, this has been an absolute pleasure. What a fascinating discussion. I could talk to you guys all day long. We could do a whole separate series of podcasts on AI, of course, but I just want to say thank you both. It is great to see you both, two of my favorites. And also, Barbara, we shouldn't forget, we also worked together at Avery Dennison.
I know, I was thinking that too, but I never saw you.
That's it. I know. But anyway, I thank you both. Any closing comments that you'd like to make?
Oh, great discussion. You asked really good questions, and hopefully anybody who listens to this podcast will get something, glean something from it.
Oh, I have no doubt that they will. Yeah.
Go back to the first comment we made. It's very important to make yourself marketable, very important to build your brand, and get out there and you'll find a job.
100%.
That's great.
Well done. Thank you to each of you.
If you want to take a look first at our website, we're at www. Clients First, Marketing and Communications, or just MC.com. And you'll find out a lot about us. You'll also see links to our podcasts, and you'll have a clear link to our social channels. We're on all the most relevant ones, and please take a visit there, and you'll learn more about us and why we might make sense, why we might not make sense, and you can choose for yourself. But please join us again in another 2 weeks when we offer you a podcast on, I have no idea right now, John, but we'll think of it.
We will figure it out, I'm sure. But if it's half as good as this one, I think it's going to be pretty good.
We're going to be lucky. We're going to be lucky. Hey, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Darryl. And of course, thank you, John.
Thanks, guys.
For having us.
Bye-bye.
See y'all.